You didn't see it coming. Nobody ever does. One Tuesday morning, completely ordinary, coffee in hand, maybe even humming something, your world cracked open. Not slowly, not with a warning, just crack. And suddenly, everything you thought was solid turned out to be paper. Maybe it was a text message. Maybe it was a voicemail you had to listen to 3 times because your brain refused to process it. Maybe it was a number on a screen, a look on someone's face, or the terrifying silence after a conversation you never expected to have. Here's what nobody prepares you for. It's not the big dramatic moment that breaks you. It's the Tuesday morning after. When you wake up and for exactly 3 seconds, everything feels normal. And then it hits you all over again. That's the part that really gets you. And here's the question nobody asks out loud, but everyone is thinking, how do you stay calm when the ground beneath you has turned to quicksand? I'm not going to give you a breathing technique and send you on your way. What I'm going to share with you today goes much deeper than that. Because staying calm when life falls apart isn't about keeping it together on the outside. It's about something far more powerful. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly what that is. But first, I need to tell you something important. Something most people get completely wrong about calmness itself. The biggest lie about staying calm. Most people think calmness means the absence of chaos. That calm people somehow have less drama, fewer problems, smoother lives. That if you're truly calm, nothing really bothers you. That's not calmness, that's numbness. And there's a massive difference. Real calmness, the kind that actually holds up when your life is on fire, isn't about having no storm. It's about discovering that inside you, there is a place the storm cannot reach. Think about how a lighthouse works. The ocean doesn't suddenly become peaceful because the lighthouse is standing there. The waves still crash, the wind still howls, but the lighthouse doesn't move. It doesn't apologize for the weather. It just keeps shining, steady and sure, because it was built for exactly this. That's what we're building today. Not a version of you that avoids the storm, a version of you that becomes the lighthouse. And the beautiful, somewhat uncomfortable truth is this. You can't build that lighthouse in calm water. It gets built exactly where you are right now, in the middle of everything, feeling like it's falling apart. Chapter 1. The Control Illusion. And why letting go sets you free. Let's start with the thing that's probably burning the most energy inside you right now without you even realizing it. You are fighting reality. Not consciously, not because you're being dramatic or weak, but because your brain, your beautifully designed, incredibly powerful human brain, was wired to believe that if you think hard enough, worry enough, analyze enough, you can somehow change what has already happened or prevent what you're afraid might happen. And so you lie awake at 3 a.m. replaying conversations, rerunning decisions, rearranging timelines in your head. What if I had said this differently? What if I had seen the signs earlier? What if I had made a different choice back then? Here's the hard truth, delivered with all the gentleness I can manage. That mental replaying is not problem solving. It's suffering in a loop. And it costs you everything. Your sleep, your clarity, your energy, your ability to actually do something useful about your situation. The ancient Stoic philosophers, people who lived through wars, exile, the loss of everything they owned, figured something out that modern psychology has since confirmed. We don't suffer from events. We suffer from our resistance to events. Read that again, slowly. You don't suffer from what happened. You suffer from your insistence that it shouldn't have happened. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but it really shouldn't have happened. It was unfair. It was wrong. And maybe you're absolutely right. Maybe it was unfair. Maybe it was completely unjust. That doesn't change the next part, which is the part that actually matters for your well-being. It happened. Those two words, fully accepted, are more liberating than any self-help strategy ever invented. The people who navigate crisis most effectively, not the people who feel the least pain, but the people who find their way through. They've learned one crucial distinction. They've learned to separate their circle of influence from everything outside it. Your circle of influence is real, and it matters. It includes your thoughts, your choices, your responses, your next action, your attitude toward your situation. These things are yours. These things you can work with. Outside that circle, other people's decisions, the economy, timing, accidents, illness, what already happened, what might happen. These things consume enormous energy when you try to control them, and they respond to that energy by staying exactly the same. Here's a practical way to feel this distinction in your body, not just understand it in your head. The next time you notice yourself spiraling, whether it's about your finances, a relationship, your health, your career, pause. Put one hand on your chest, take a breath, and ask yourself two questions. First, is this something I can influence right now, today, with an action I can actually take? Second, or am I fighting against something that has already happened or something I genuinely cannot control? If the answer to the first question is yes, fantastic. Do that thing. Start there. Move toward your circle of influence with your full attention. If the answer is no, if you're fighting what is or what was, then the most courageous, most productive thing you can do is practice something that feels almost counterintuitive at first. You practice putting down the fight, not giving up, not going passive, not throwing your hands in the air, just stopping the exhausting, futile mental wrestling match with reality. Because here's what's waiting on the other side of that fight: clarity, energy, the ability to actually see your options instead of being blinded by resistance. Think about the last time you were stuck in unexpected traffic, not your commute, but a real standstill, maybe a holiday weekend or a sudden closure on the highway. Remember how some people in that situation gripped their steering wheels, laid on their horns, and arrived at their destination seething with tension, even though the traffic had long since cleared? And remember how some people used that same stretch of time to listen to a podcast, call someone they'd been meaning to catch up with, or simply breathe? The traffic was identical for both people. The experience was completely different. Your current crisis is the traffic. You cannot move it by being angry at it, but you can absolutely decide what you do while you're in it. This isn't about spiritual bypassing or pretending everything is fine. It's about being strategically intelligent with the one truly finite resource you have: your energy. When you stop pouring your energy into fighting what you cannot change, something remarkable happens. That energy becomes available to you, and you can use it to actually move. This shift from fighting reality to working with reality is the foundation of everything we're going to build together in this conversation. Without it, Every other strategy is like building furniture in a room that's still on fire. With it, you have something real to stand on. Take it seriously. Practice it this week with small things. When your coffee gets cold before you can drink it, notice the micro-resistance, the tiny "this shouldn't have happened," and practice releasing it. When a plan changes at the last minute, when someone cancels, when the rain comes on the one day you wanted to be outside, notice your resistance and practice choosing your response instead of being driven by it. Small practice builds large capacity, and you're going to need that capacity. Chapter 2. The Gift Hidden Inside Impermanence. Let me ask you something. Think about the worst moment of your life before this one. The thing that felt unsurvivable at the time. The situation you were convinced was permanent, defining, final. Are you still in it? For almost everyone reading this, the answer is no. You're here now, which means you got through it. Maybe not cleanly, maybe not without scars, but you got through. And yet, when we're inside a difficult moment, our brain does this infuriating thing where it forgets every single piece of evidence it has that things change. It presents the current pain as permanent. It says, this is how it is now, and this is how it will always be. This is your brain trying to protect you, which is sweet, but it's also spectacularly unhelpful. Here's the truth about impermanence, and this is one of the most powerful tools you'll ever have in your back pocket during a crisis. Everything is temporary, including this. Your current financial situation, temporary. Your current relationship status, temporary. Your current health challenge, temporary. Your current confusion about what comes next, temporary. The feeling of being lost, broken, behind, stuck, temporary, temporary, temporary. Now, here's the part that most people miss when they hear everything is temporary. Yes, your problems are temporary, but so is the version of you who is struggling with them right now. And what replaces that version isn't someone weaker. It's someone with something the person before the crisis didn't have. Evidence. Evidence that you can handle hard things. Evidence that you are more adaptable than you thought. Evidence that the floor doesn't actually disappear. That even when it shakes violently, you find your footing. There's a concept in material science called work hardening. When you subject certain metals to repeated stress, they don't weaken. They actually become stronger and more resistant to future stress. The very process of being tested is what creates the durability. You are not a metal. You are far more complex and interesting than a metal. But the principle applies. The stress you're currently under, navigated with even a fraction of wisdom, is not just something to survive. It's the process by which you become someone who can handle more, feel more, give more. That said, and this matters, impermanence doesn't mean your pain isn't real right now. Your grief is real. Your fear is real. Your exhaustion is real. Telling yourself this is temporary isn't about dismissing what you're feeling. It's about giving your feeling a container instead of letting it become the entire room. You can feel the fear and remember it won't last forever. You can grieve a loss and hold the knowledge that grief itself transforms over time. You can sit with uncertainty and trust that clarity tends to arrive. Not always on the schedule you'd prefer, but it arrives. Here's a practice that sounds almost too simple, but is genuinely powerful. When you're deep in a difficult feeling during this period, try saying this to yourself. Not to dismiss the feeling, but to give it a timeline. I am feeling this right now, and I have felt hard things before, and I am still here. 3 clauses, all true, all grounding. The first clause honors what's real. The second clause activates your history as evidence. The third clause returns you to the present moment, where you are, despite everything, still functioning, still breathing, still here. And being still here, even when being here is hard, is not nothing. It is everything. The people who maintain the most genuine calmness during crisis aren't the ones who feel the least. They're the ones who feel fully while remembering that feelings move, that seasons change, that Tuesday mornings eventually give way to Thursday afternoons, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those Thursday afternoons are better than you ever thought they'd be when you were in the worst of it. Your story is not finished. This chapter is hard, but it is one chapter. Chapter 3, Building Your Inner Sanctuary. Here's something I want you to sit with for a moment. When was the last time you felt genuinely peaceful? Not because everything was going well, not because there was nothing to worry about, but just peaceful, settled, like you were standing on solid ground inside yourself, regardless of what was happening around you. If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone. Most people have never been taught that this kind of peace exists, let alone how to access it. We've been taught to look for peace out there, in the right job, the right relationship, the right bank account balance, the right circumstances finally lining up the way we planned. And that approach works until it doesn't. Until life rearranges your carefully organized external world overnight and you realize that every bit of peace you felt was rented, not owned, contingent on conditions that turned out to be less permanent than you thought. What we're talking about, building here, is different. This is owned peace. Peace that doesn't depend on your circumstances cooperating. Think of it this way. Imagine 2 people standing on a dock during a storm. The first person's stability depends entirely on the dock staying still. Every wave that rocks it sends them stumbling, grabbing for something to hold on to, terrified of falling in. Their balance is borrowed from the dock's stillness. The second person has spent years developing core strength, the internal kind deep in their center. When the dock rocks, they feel it. They're not numb to it, but their balance comes from inside them, not from the dock. The storm is the same. The dock is the same. Their experience of it is completely different. That internal core strength, the psychological, emotional, and spiritual version of it, is what we're calling your inner sanctuary. And here's the most important thing to understand about it. You don't build it by avoiding storms. You build it by learning to stay centered while the dock is rocking. The observer within you. There is a part of you that is always watching. Right now, as you're reading this, there's a part of you that is aware of your thoughts about what you're reading. There's a part of you that can notice when your mind wanders, when a sentence lands hard, when something makes you feel a flicker of recognition or resistance. This is what psychologists call the observing self, and it is your greatest asset during crisis. Most of the time, you're not in your observing self. You're in your experiencing self, fully merged with whatever emotion or thought is happening, completely identified with it. When you're scared, you don't think, I am noticing fear. You think, I am terrified. When you're overwhelmed, you don't think, I am observing overwhelm. You think, I cannot handle this. The difference between those two positions, experiencing versus observing, is the difference between being swept away by a river and standing on the bank watching it flow. Here's how you access your observing self when you're in the thick of it. The moment you notice an intense emotion or thought spiral beginning, try this. Silently say to yourself, I notice that I am feeling blank, not I am terrified. But I notice that I am feeling terrified, not I can't handle this. But I notice that I'm having the thought that I can't handle this. This tiny linguistic shift creates genuine psychological distance. It's not denial. You're fully acknowledging what's happening, but you're acknowledging it from a slightly elevated position. You're not inside the river, you're on the bank watching it. From the bank, you can think, you can choose, you can decide what to do next. From inside the river, you can only react. Presence as a practical tool. The inner sanctuary is accessed through presence, not the Instagram concept of presence, not some serene, candlelit, perfectly curated stillness. Real presence. Messy, imperfect, sometimes uncomfortable presence in the actual moment you're in. Here's what presence actually means during a crisis. Your mind is in the same room as your body. That's it. That's the whole thing. Because when life is falling apart, your mind is almost never where your body is. Your body is sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning. Your mind is 3 months in the future catastrophizing about everything that could go wrong, or 3 years in the past analyzing every decision that led here. Your body is in the present. Your mind is everywhere but. Presence is the act of calling your mind back, gently, repeatedly, without judgment. Your 5 senses are your fastest tools for doing this. They only operate in the present moment. You cannot smell next Tuesday or hear last Thursday, so when you're spinning out, use them deliberately. What can you see right now? Name 5 things slowly. What can you hear? Not what you're thinking about, what you're actually hearing in this moment. What does the surface under your hands feel like right now? The temperature of the air on your skin? This isn't a distraction technique. It's a return technique. You're returning to the only moment where you actually have any power. This one. Emotional independence. What it actually means? Building your inner sanctuary also means building what I'll call emotional independence. And before you misread that, this isn't about becoming cold, detached, or self-sufficient to the point of isolation. Emotional independence means your inner peace is not held hostage by any single external factor. Not by whether someone approves of you, not by whether your boss is in a good mood today, not by whether the news is good or terrible, not by whether the person you love is happy with you right now. When your inner state is wired directly to any of these external variables, you've essentially handed your nervous system's remote control to something you cannot control. And then you wonder why you feel so out of control. Emotional independence is the slow, steady process of taking that remote control back. It doesn't happen overnight. It's built in moments. Moments where you catch yourself looking outside for permission to feel okay, and you choose instead to find that okay inside yourself. Moments where someone's opinion of you lands differently than it used to because you've developed enough of a relationship with your own values that external judgment doesn't reach your foundation. This is your inner sanctuary taking shape, not a place you visit occasionally, a place you come home to. Chapter 4. The Radical Power of Acceptance. The word acceptance has a serious PR problem. When most people hear it, they think it means resignation, giving up, deciding that nothing can be done, saying, fine, whatever, and lying down in defeat. That is not what radical acceptance is, not even close. Radical acceptance is one of the most active, courageous things a human being can do, because what it requires is that you look directly at what is happening, not what you wish was happening, not what should be happening according to your completely reasonable plans, and say, this is real. This is what I'm actually dealing with. And from that honest ground, you start moving. Here's the distinction that changes everything. There are two ways to respond when something goes wrong. The first way, you spend enormous energy fighting the fact that it happened. It shouldn't have happened. This isn't fair. I can't believe this is my life right now. You're essentially trying to undo the past with the power of your indignation, which, if you've tried it, you may have noticed doesn't actually work. The second way, you acknowledge it fully. This happened. This is where I am. I didn't want this, and it's still real. And from that place of clear-eyed honesty, you ask, now what? The first response feels like doing something. It has heat and energy and righteousness to it. But it's motion without movement. You're burning fuel in a car that's not in gear. The second response might feel quieter, even vulnerable, but it's the one that actually gets you somewhere. Imagine you're hiking and you take a wrong turn. You end up a mile off the trail in unfamiliar terrain with less daylight than you'd like. The resistant response, spending 20 minutes furious at yourself for the wrong turn, analyzing exactly where you went wrong, circling back mentally to every decision point. Meanwhile, the sun keeps moving. The accepting response, okay, I'm here. This isn't where I meant to be, but it's where I am. What can I see? Which direction is the sun? What do I know about this terrain? And then you start moving with the actual information available to you. Acceptance is how you stop wasting daylight. Accepting your own emotions. There's a specific application of radical acceptance that most people overlook, and it's arguably the most important one during crisis. Accepting your own emotional responses without judgment. When life falls apart, you're going to feel things. Intense, uncomfortable, sometimes confusing things. You might feel afraid, and then feel embarrassed about being afraid. You might feel angry, and then feel guilty about the anger. You might feel sad, and then feel frustrated that you can't just pull yourself together. This is suffering on top of suffering. The original difficult emotion, and then the layer of judgment you pile on top of it for having the emotion. Radical acceptance of your emotions means this: whatever you're feeling right now is a completely natural response to a difficult situation. You don't have to earn the right to feel it. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to fix it immediately. You just have to let it be real. Here's the paradox that therapists and wisdom traditions have both confirmed independently. Emotions that are fully accepted tend to move through you more quickly. Emotions that are resisted, judged, or suppressed tend to get stuck, sometimes for years. The tears you let yourself cry take less time than the ones you swallow every day for a decade. Feel what you feel. It's not weakness, it's honesty. And honesty is where everything useful starts. Accepting uncertainty. Perhaps the hardest version of acceptance during crisis is accepting that you don't know how this ends. Your brain hates this. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine. It runs constantly on the fuel of knowing what comes next. When that knowing gets ripped away, When the future goes genuinely unclear, your brain treats it as a threat. It generates anxiety, worst-case scenarios, catastrophic projections, not because they're likely, but because your brain would rather predict something terrible than predict nothing at all. The antidote to this isn't false certainty. You can't talk yourself into knowing things you don't know. The antidote is building what's called uncertainty tolerance, your capacity to move forward without needing the full picture first. Think about how you drive at night. Your headlights only illuminate a short distance ahead. You cannot see the full route from where you're sitting, but you don't park the car and wait for daylight. You move forward into the available light, trusting that more light will appear as you go. That's uncertainty tolerance in practice. Not knowing everything, moving forward anyway, trusting that the next stretch of road will become visible when you reach it. Chapter 5, Emotional Regulation, Your Most Practical Superpower. Let's get specific and practical, because you deserve more than beautiful metaphors. You deserve tools you can actually use at 2 a.m. when your chest is tight and your thoughts are racing. Emotional regulation is not about suppressing how you feel. Let me be completely clear about that, because this concept gets misunderstood constantly. Emotional regulation is the skill of experiencing intense emotions without being completely hijacked by them. It's the difference between feeling the wave and being held underwater by it. During crisis, your emotional system goes into overdrive. This is not a character flaw, this is neuroscience. Your amygdala, your brain's threat detection system, doesn't distinguish between a tiger in the forest and a catastrophic text message. Both register as danger. Both trigger the same cascade of stress hormones, the same narrowing of focus, the same tunnel vision. The problem is that the strategies useful for escaping a tiger, run, freeze, fight, are spectacularly useless for navigating a financial crisis or a relationship breakdown. You can't outrun a bank statement. You can't fight a medical diagnosis into submission, so you need a different system. The stop method. When you feel yourself hitting emotional overload, when the thoughts are spiraling and the feelings are overwhelming, and you're about to say or do something from a place of pure reaction, use this. S. Stop. Literally pause whatever you're doing. If you're in a conversation, excuse yourself for a moment. If you're alone, just stop moving. T. Take a breath. One slow, deliberate breath. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 2, out through the mouth for 6. That extended exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, your body's built-in calm-down system. This is not a suggestion, this is biology. O. Observe. Without judgment, notice what you're experiencing. What does it feel like in your body? Where is the tension? What is your mind doing? You're not trying to fix it yet. You're just observing. P. Proceed. From this slightly more grounded place, make a conscious choice about what you do next, not what your panic wants you to do. What you, with access to your own wisdom, choose to do. The stop method works because it interrupts the automatic momentum of emotional overwhelm. It creates a microsecond of choice where before there was only reaction. And in that microsecond, you are free. Emotional labeling research from UCLA neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman found something remarkable. The simple act of naming your emotions reduces their intensity, measurably, neurologically. When you're flooded with difficult feelings and you take 30 seconds to get specific, not just, I feel bad, but I feel scared about the financial uncertainty, And underneath that, I feel ashamed that I'm in this situation. Your prefrontal cortex activates. Your thinking brain comes back online. The emotional flood recedes just enough to let you think. So when you're overwhelmed, don't reach for distraction first. Reach for a label. Get specific. What exactly are you feeling, and what is it about? You'll be surprised how much power that specificity gives you. The body is always on your side. Your body is not your enemy during crisis. It's your fastest route back to regulation. Movement, even a 10-minute walk, metabolizes cortisol and adrenaline. These are the stress hormones flooding your system, and they were designed to be burned off through physical action. When you sit still and worry, they accumulate. When you move, they clear. Sleep is not a luxury during crisis. It's the mechanism by which your brain processes difficult experiences and restores your capacity for emotional regulation. When you're sleep deprived, the amygdala becomes 60% more reactive. Everything feels more threatening. Every decision feels harder. Protect your sleep like it's medicine, because during crisis, it essentially is. And please, eat something real. Blood sugar crashes don't just make you hungry, they make everything feel more catastrophic than it is. Some of what feels like existential crisis at 4 p.m. might be a sandwich problem. Take care of the machine. It's the only one you have, and it's carrying you through the hardest thing. Chapter 6. Reframing Crisis. What if this is happening for you? Before you roll your eyes at that heading, I'm not about to tell you that everything happens for a reason in some neat, prepackaged fortune cookie way. That's not this. What I am going to ask you to consider is this. What if crisis is less like a punishment and more like a renovation? Renovations are awful. If you've ever lived through one, you know, there's dust everywhere. Things that were functional are suddenly ripped out and useless. The house looks worse before it looks better. You step on nails in the dark. You wonder why you started this. You mourn the way it was, even if the way it was wasn't working. And then gradually, something new takes shape. Something that fits better. Something you couldn't have gotten to without going through the destruction first. Crisis has that structure, not always, not magically, but more often than coincidence can explain. Think about the inflection points in your own life, the moments that, looking back, you recognize as turning points. How many of them felt like opportunities when they were happening? How many of them felt at the time like the floor dropping out? The job loss that eventually led to the career that actually fit. The relationship that ended and cracked open a self-understanding you never would have reached inside it. The health scare that rewired your priorities in ways nothing else could have. The financial collapse that stripped away the lifestyle that was keeping you too busy to ask whether you actually wanted it. This is not about manufacturing gratitude for painful experiences. You are not required to be thankful for hard things, but you are allowed to remain open to the possibility that something useful is happening even when it doesn't feel useful. What crisis strips away. Here's what crisis does that comfort never can. It shows you what's actually load-bearing in your life. When everything is stable, you carry a lot of weight you don't notice. Habits that aren't serving you. Relationships maintained out of obligation. A version of yourself performed for an audience. Goals that belong to someone else's idea of your life. Crisis is ruthlessly efficient at identifying what was never essential. The things that fall away first, under pressure, were often the things that were costing you the most energy to maintain. This is not a gentle process, but the clarity it produces is real. Post-traumatic growth psychology has a name for what happens when people emerge from crisis with expanded capacity: post-traumatic growth. And before you assume this is reserved for extraordinary people with exceptional resilience, understand this: it's documented in ordinary people, in all demographics, across cultures and age groups. People who experience post-traumatic growth consistently report the same things: deeper relationships, a clearer sense of priorities, a surprising discovery of their own strength, an appreciation for life that they describe as qualitatively different from anything they felt before the crisis, not instead of the pain, not by bypassing the difficulty, through it. The growth doesn't happen because the crisis was good. The growth happens because the crisis demanded something from them that they didn't know they had. And meeting that demand, it even imperfectly, even messily, proves something to them about themselves that no amount of comfortable living ever could have. You are in that process right now, even if you can't see the new shape taking form yet. Especially then. Chapter 7. The unexpected strength of letting yourself be vulnerable. Let me paint you a picture you might recognize. Someone asks how you're doing, and before the words even form in their mouth, you've already calculated your answer. Fine, I'm fine. Managing. You know how it is. Maybe a self-deprecating joke. Maybe a quick pivot to asking about them instead. Anything to avoid the real answer, which is, I'm not fine. I'm holding myself together with the equivalent of duct tape and sheer stubbornness, and I'm not sure how much longer that's going to hold. You know this move. Most of us have been doing it our entire adult lives. And here's the thing. It makes sense. It genuinely makes sense. At some point, probably pretty early, you learned that showing your struggle was risky, that needing help was interpreted as weakness, that being vulnerable meant being exposed in ways that could be used against you. So you built the armor, piece by piece, experience by experience, until it became so familiar you forgot it was armor at all and started thinking it was just you. But here's what that armor costs you during crisis. When you insist on appearing fine, you cut yourself off from the exact resources that could actually help you. People who might have offered genuine support don't know you need it. People who've navigated similar terrain and learned valuable things can't share what they know because you haven't signaled that you're in similar terrain. And you, the real you carrying the real weight, have to carry it completely alone because the performing version of you is too busy keeping up appearances. The armor that was designed to protect you ends up isolating you, and isolation during crisis is one of the most reliably destructive things a human being can experience. What vulnerable strength actually looks like. Vulnerability during crisis does not look like falling apart in every conversation. It doesn't mean broadcasting your struggles to people who haven't earned that level of trust. And it definitely doesn't mean making your pain the centerpiece of every interaction. Vulnerable strength looks like this. It looks like calling someone you trust and saying, I'm having a really hard time, and I could use someone to talk to. 7 words that take more courage than most people realize. It looks like answering, how are you? Honestly, with someone safe. Honestly, it's been rough. Can I tell you what's going on? It looks like sitting with a mentor, a therapist, a trusted friend, And instead of presenting a polished summary of your challenges with all the solutions already identified, saying, I genuinely don't know what to do here. I need help thinking this through. It looks like letting someone bring you food when you can't cook, accepting the help offered without immediately calculating how you'll repay it, allowing care to land. These things feel enormous from the inside. From the outside, they look like what they are, a human being human. The connection crisis. Inside the crisis. Here's something researchers studying resilience have found consistently. The single most predictive factor of how well people navigate major life disruption is not their intelligence, their resources, their prior experience, or their personality type. It's connection. People who feel genuinely connected, who have at least one or two relationships where they can be completely honest about what they're experiencing, recover faster, make better decisions, and emerge with more psychological growth than people facing objectively easier circumstances, but navigating them alone. You were not designed to do hard things in isolation. Your nervous system literally co-regulates with other nervous systems, meaning that the physical presence of a calm, caring person actually changes your physiological stress response. This is not metaphor. This is neuroscience. Other people calm you down at a biological level in ways that solitary coping cannot fully replicate. So when you white-knuckle your way through crisis alone in the name of not being a burden, you're not being strong. You're being biologically inefficient and emotionally depleted when you could be allowing a natural healing mechanism, human connection, to do some of the work. You are not a burden for struggling. You are a human being in a hard season, reaching for what humans have always reached for when seasons get hard. Each other. Being honest about what you don't know. There's a specific flavor of vulnerability that crisis demands and that most people find particularly difficult. Admitting that you don't have a plan. Our culture has a complicated relationship with not knowing. We reward confidence, even false confidence, far more consistently than we reward honest uncertainty. So when everything falls apart and someone asks what you're going to do, the pressure to have an answer, a direction, a strategy already mapped out can be overwhelming. But pretending to have a plan you don't have is exhausting. And it closes you off to actually finding one because you're too busy defending the fake plan to remain genuinely open to new information. There is real power in saying out loud, I don't know yet. I'm figuring it out. It is not defeat. It is honesty. And from honest ground, real plans can actually grow. Self-compassion as the foundation. The deepest form of vulnerability, and the one that pays the highest dividends, is the vulnerability of being kind to yourself when you're struggling. Most people treat themselves during crisis the way a harsh critic would. Every stumble is evidence of inadequacy. Every difficult day is proof that they're failing at recovery. Every moment of fear or sadness is interpreted as weakness that should be overcome rather than experience that should be honored. Imagine watching your closest friend go through exactly what you're going through. Same circumstances, same challenges, same emotional weight. Now imagine the advice you would give them, the tone you would use, the gentleness you would bring. Why is that available for them and not for you? Self-compassion isn't self-pity. Self-pity says, why does this always happen to me, and stays there marinating? Self-compassion says, this is genuinely hard. and I'm allowed to struggle with it, and then keeps moving. The research on self-compassion, led largely by psychologist Dr. Kristen Neff, shows something that surprises people. Self-compassionate people are actually more resilient, not less. They bounce back faster. They're more willing to try again after failure. They're more emotionally stable during crisis. Because when you're not spending energy beating yourself up, you have that energy available for something more useful. Be gentle with yourself, not as a reward for doing well, as a practice, especially when you're not. Chapter 8. Creating Stability When Everything Feels Unstable. Here is one of the most counterintuitive things I can tell you about crisis. The moment when you feel least like maintaining your routines is the exact moment when maintaining them matters most. I know. When your world is shaking, the idea of keeping a morning routine or going to bed at a consistent time can feel almost absurd, like rearranging the furniture while the house is flooding. But here's why it matters, and why the analogy is actually backwards. Your routines are not furniture. They're the structural beams. They're what keeps the walls standing while you deal with the flood. When external life becomes chaotic and unpredictable, your internal rhythms become the primary source of structure you have. If you abandon them during the chaos, you're removing the scaffolding at the exact moment the building needs it most. Think about what happens to a ship in a storm. The anchor doesn't prevent the storm. It doesn't make the water calm. But it keeps the ship from being carried completely off course while the storm does what storms do. Your daily practices are your anchor. And in a storm, you need your anchor more than ever. What stability actually requires. Let me be realistic with you, because this isn't about perfection. During crisis, your capacity is reduced. Your energy is being consumed by processing, managing, and surviving. Expecting yourself to maintain an elaborate self-care regimen during this time is not compassionate. It's another setup for feeling like you're failing. What you're looking for is minimum effective dose. What is the smallest, most consistent version of your stabilizing practices that you can actually maintain right now? Not the ideal version, the sustainable version. Maybe your morning routine used to be an hour. Right now, it's 10 minutes. 10 minutes of something intentional, a few deep breaths, 1 cup of coffee away from your phone, 2 pages of something that feeds your mind rather than your anxiety, is not nothing. It is a signal to your nervous system that there is still structure, that the day has a shape, that you are still, in some small but real way, in charge of how it begins. That signal matters more than you know. The boundaries you need right now. During a crisis, information can become a form of self-harm. If your situation involves something in the news, social media, or constant incoming updates, a financial market, a medical situation, a public event affecting your life, the temptation to monitor constantly is real and understandable. Your brain wants information because information feels like control. But there is a point where more information stops being useful and starts being destabilizing, where the incoming stream of data is no longer helping you make better decisions, but is simply keeping your nervous system in a constant state of high alert. You need to decide when you check, not if, when. Set a specific window. Maybe you allow yourself to look at the relevant information twice a day, at designated times. Outside those windows, you close the tab. You put the phone down. You give your nervous system a break from the flood. This is not avoidance. Avoidance would mean never checking at all, which creates its own anxiety. This is strategic management of your attention, one of the most valuable things you can do with it. Physical space as psychological anchor. Your environment affects your inner state more than most people consciously realize. When everything around you is chaotic, having at least one physical space that feels ordered and calm provides real psychological relief. Not because the tidy corner solves any of your problems, but because your brain reads environmental cues continuously, and an environment of chaos reinforces an internal experience of chaos. This doesn't require money, time, or a beautiful home. It might be just one corner of one room, your side of the bed, kept clear, the kitchen table wiped clean before you sit down to eat, a small surface with one plant, one candle, one book you're actually reading. Create one space that feels like yours, that feels intentional, that signals to your nervous system, here at least there is some order. Here at least someone is paying attention. That someone is you. And that matters. Staying connected when you want to disappear, crisis has a gravitational pull toward isolation. When you're struggling, the instinct to withdraw, to stop answering messages, to cancel plans, to pull back from people is powerful and understandable. Sometimes a little withdrawal is healthy. You need space to process. You don't owe anyone constant access to your inner life. But there's a version of withdrawal that crosses a line, where you're not taking healthy space but actively hiding, and where the hiding is making everything harder and lonelier. The research on social connection during crisis is unambiguous. Consistent contact with even one or two genuinely supportive people makes a measurable difference to outcomes. Not large groups, not social performance, just real, honest contact with people who actually care about you. Make the effort, especially when you don't feel like it. A brief text, a 10-minute phone call, accepting the dinner invitation you were about to decline. These small acts of connection are not interruptions to your recovery. They are part of it. Small victories as psychological fuel. When you're in a difficult season, your brain needs evidence that you are still capable, that you can still accomplish things, that forward motion is still possible. Big goals can wait. Right now, you need small wins. Read one chapter. Finish one task that's been sitting on your list. Cook one real meal. Take one walk that you committed to taking. These accomplishments are not trivial. During crisis, they are evidence, concrete, undeniable evidence, that you are still functioning, still capable of intention and follow-through. Celebrate them, not extravagantly, but notice them, register them, let them count, because they do count. In the accumulation of hard days, every small act of agency is a brick in the foundation you're rebuilding. Chapter 9. The Power of Now. Coming back to this moment, your mind is a time traveler, and during crisis it travels almost exclusively to two destinations: the past, where it replays everything that went wrong, and the future, where it projects everything that might still go wrong. The present moment, the only place where anything can actually be done, gets almost no airtime. This is the root of so much of the suffering that crisis creates. Not just the difficult circumstances themselves, but the mental multiplication of those circumstances. Past regret compounding on future fear, creating a weight that's far heavier than the actual present moment ever is. Here's what's true about right now. In this exact moment, you are reading this. You are breathing. You exist. Whatever is, happening in your life, in this specific moment, you are here. And here is survivable. Here is manageable. Here you have some power. Why the future is making you suffer more than necessary, anxiety is almost always future-focused. It's your brain running simulations of worst-case scenarios, not because those scenarios are likely, but because your brain believes that if it imagines the worst, it can somehow prevent it or at least be prepared for it. The problem is that most of what your anxious mind projects never actually happens. And even the things that do happen rarely happen in the form your anxious mind imagined. The anticipation of difficult things is almost always worse than the actual experience of navigating them. Because when you're in the actual moment of the hard thing, you have resources available to you. Information, instinct, other people, your own capability, that your anticipatory fear doesn't account for. Every hour you spend in anxious future projection is an hour of suffering that the future hasn't even earned yet. You're paying in advance for pain that may never be delivered. Why the past keeps pulling you back. Depression and grief are almost always past-focused. The replaying, the reanalyzing, the rehearsing of different decisions, the mourning of how things were or how they should have been. Some of this is necessary and useful. Reflection and learning from experience is genuinely valuable. But there's a point where reflection becomes rumination, where you're no longer extracting useful information from past experience, but just re-experiencing the pain of it over and over without any new insight being generated. You can recognize rumination by this quality. It circles. It covers the same ground repeatedly without arriving anywhere new. It has heat and urgency, but no direction. It exhausts you without clarifying anything. When you notice that quality, that's your signal to gently redirect. Returning to the present. Practically, the simplest present moment anchor you have is your breath. Not because breathing is magical, although the physiology of slow breathing is genuinely powerful, but because your breath is always happening in the present. You cannot breathe in the past or the future. The breath is always now. When you notice your mind has traveled forward into catastrophe or backward into regret, you don't need to fight it. You don't need to judge yourself for the mental time travel. You just come back. One breath. Back to this room. Back to this body. Back to now. You'll have to do this many times, possibly hundreds of times in a single day during a difficult period. That's not failure. That's practice. The returning is the practice. The number of times you have to return is not evidence that you're doing it wrong. It's evidence that you're doing it. What's actually here right now. Present moment awareness also opens you to something that pure survival mode closes. Noticing what is still good, even during crisis. Even in the hardest seasons, there are moments that are neutral, moments that are even quietly okay. The first sip of something warm in the morning, the feeling of sunlight on your face, a song that lands just right, a moment of genuine laughter that surprises you. These moments are not betrayals of your struggle. They are not evidence that things aren't that bad. They are evidence that life is always more than just one thing, even when that one thing is very, very hard. Notice them. Not to manufacture gratitude you don't feel, just to register that they're there. That the whole of your existence is not reducible to the crisis, even while the crisis is real and significant. The present moment is where you live. Everything else, the past you can't change, the future you can't control, is real. But it's not where life actually happens. Life happens here, now, in the moment you're in. And in this moment, you are still here. That is not nothing. That is the beginning of everything. Chapter 10, Building Resilience That Actually Lasts. Here's something worth pausing on for a moment. You've already survived every single hard day you've ever had. Everyone. 100% success rate on getting through difficult things, up to and including today. That's not a small thing. That's actually remarkable. And most people never stop to register it because they're too busy measuring themselves against some imagined standard of how well they should be handling things, instead of recognizing that handling things, even imperfectly, even barely, still counts as handling them. Resilience gets talked about like it's a personality trait, something some people are born with and others aren't. The resilient ones bounce back quickly, don't complain, have a positive attitude, and seem almost cheerfully unaffected by the things that would level the rest of us. That's not resilience. That's a performance of resilience. And performances are exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. Real resilience looks messier than that. Real resilience is the person who is genuinely devastated by what happened, who sits with it, feels it fully, struggles with it authentically, and who, despite all of that, keeps making the next small decision, keeps taking the next available step, doesn't give up even on the days when continuing forward feels like pushing through concrete. That's resilience. And you've been demonstrating it, probably for longer than you realize. Your resilience resume. Here's an exercise that sounds simple and is more powerful than it appears. Take 10 minutes, not right now, but soon, when you have a quiet moment, and make a list. Not a list of your problems, not a list of your fears, a list of hard things you've already gotten through. Go back as far as you need to. The difficult childhood moment you navigated without the support you deserved. The failure that felt defining at the time and turned out not to be. The loss that you weren't sure you'd survive. The transition that required you to become a different version of yourself than you'd planned on being. Write them down. All of them. And next to each one, write what you discovered about yourself in the process of getting through it. This is not a nostalgia exercise. This is evidence collection. You are building your case, not for an imaginary judge, but for the part of your own mind that is currently convinced you don't have what it takes to get through this. Because that part of your mind is working from incomplete data. It's looking at the current challenge and saying this is too much, but it's ignoring the full data set, which includes every previous hard thing that also felt like too much at the time, and which you got through anyway. Your resilience is not theoretical, it's documented, and the document is your own life. Building forward, the concept of stress inoculation, there's a principle used in training, from military preparation to athletic coaching to surgical education, called stress inoculation. The idea is straightforward. You build tolerance for high-stress situations by deliberately exposing yourself to manageable versions of stress in controlled conditions. The emphasis on manageable is crucial. This isn't about seeking out trauma or manufacturing unnecessary hardship. It's about intentionally choosing challenges that stretch your capacity without overwhelming it, and discovering repeatedly that you can meet those challenges. In practical terms, this might look like taking on a project that requires a skill you don't fully have yet, having a difficult conversation you've been avoiding, signing up for something that makes you nervous, saying yes to an opportunity that feels slightly too big for where you currently are. Each time you do something uncomfortable and discover that you can handle it, you update your internal model of your own capacity. You accumulate evidence. You build the muscle. And, crucially, the confidence you develop this way is real. It's not manufactured by positive affirmations or motivated by someone telling you that you can do it. It comes from actual experience of doing hard things and not being destroyed by them. That kind of confidence doesn't disappear when life gets difficult again. It's been tested. It holds. The long game perspective, one of the most erosive things about crisis, is the way it collapses your sense of time. When you're in acute difficulty, the present feels enormous and permanent, and the future feels either terrifyingly uncertain or completely invisible. This is the moment to consciously zoom out, not to bypass what's happening now, not to skip the difficult present in favor of imagining a better future, but to place your current situation within a larger arc, to remember that you are not at the end of your story. You are in a chapter of it, a hard chapter, a chapter that is not the whole book. Think about the version of you 5 years from now, not the catastrophic version your anxious mind might be imagining. The version that's still carrying everything exactly as it is now. The other version, the one who got through this, who learned from it, who is someone that you can't quite picture yet because that person is still being built by what you're going through right now. What will that version of you know that you don't know yet? What will they be grateful they did during this period, even when it was hard? What will they have built quietly during this season that they couldn't have built any other way? You are not behind. You are not failing. You are in the part of the story that makes the rest of it mean something. Resilience as a daily practice. Resilience isn't only built during crisis. It's maintained between crises by daily choices that seem small and add up to something significant. The choice to process difficult emotions rather than bury them. The choice to maintain honest relationships rather than convenient ones. The choice to keep learning, keep growing, keep engaging with challenges that develop your capacity rather than avoiding everything that makes you uncomfortable. Every day you invest in these choices, you are making deposits into an account that you will draw on when the next hard thing comes. And the next hard thing will come. Not because life is cruel, but because that's the nature of being alive and engaged and caring about things. The question isn't whether you'll face more difficulty. The question is who you'll be when you do. Build the person now. One day, one choice, one small act of courage at a time. Chapter 11. Finding meaning. When everything feels pointless. There will be a moment, maybe you've already had it, maybe it's coming, where you look at everything you're going through and ask the question that crisis inevitably generates. Why? Why is this happening? Why now? Why me? What is the point of going through something this hard? And here's the honest answer, the one that doesn't condescend to you with easy reassurances. There may not be a cosmic reason why this specific thing happened to you at this specific time. Life doesn't always distribute difficulty according to any logic you can identify from the inside of it. But here's what's also true, and this is not consolation. This is a real and powerful thing. Meaning is not something you find in what happens to you. Meaning is something you create through how you respond to it. This distinction is everything. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and emerged to write one of the most enduring books in psychological literature, put it this way: "The last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude toward any given set of circumstances. Everything else can be taken from you. That cannot. You cannot control what has happened. You cannot always control what happens next. But you have enormous influence over what your experience of this period means, what it teaches you, what it changes in you, what you do with what you've been through. That is not a small thing. That is arguably the whole thing. The question that changes everything. Most people, when facing crisis, ask some version of, why is this happening to me? It's a natural question. It's a human question. But it's also a question that leads almost nowhere useful. It generates feelings of victimization, helplessness, and resentment, none of which are wrong to feel, but none of which give you any traction. There's a different question. It's harder to ask and it opens more doors. What is this teaching me? Not what is the universe trying to tell me, in some mystical sense. Just practically honestly, what are you learning about yourself through this? About your actual values, as opposed to the ones you thought you had? About which relationships are real? About what you're capable of? About what you actually want your life to look like? Crisis is a ruthlessly efficient teacher because it removes the padding, the comfortable routines, the familiar structures, the identity built on external circumstances. When those things are disrupted, what's left is something closer to the truth of who you actually are. That truth can be uncomfortable. It can be surprising. It can be grief-inducing when you realize that some of what you've lost wasn't serving you as well as you thought it was. But it's real, and real is where meaning lives. Your pain as a bridge to others. Here is one of the most reliably powerful sources of meaning available to human beings in the aftermath of difficulty. Using what you've been through to help someone else through something similar, not immediately, not before you've had time to process and begin healing, but eventually, and sometimes sooner than you expect, the experience you've accumulated, the understanding you've developed, the map of the terrain you've navigated becomes genuinely valuable to someone else who is just entering it. There is something that happens when you sit across from another person who is in the middle of what you've already survived, and you can say, not with false cheerfulness, but with the quiet authority of someone who actually knows, I have been here, I understand this, and here's what I learned. That moment transforms your pain retroactively. It gives it a purpose that didn't exist before, and that purpose, even partial, even quiet, is meaning. You don't need to become a therapist or a public speaker or write a book. You just need to be honest, when the time is right, with one person who needs to hear that someone else has been in this territory and found a way through. That's enough. That's actually enormous. The clarification gift crisis has a way of clarifying values that comfortable times obscure. When everything's going smoothly, it's easy to drift, to spend time and energy on things that don't actually matter to you, because the cost of that drift isn't immediately visible. The career that's fine, but not fulfilling. The relationships maintained out of habit rather than genuine nourishment. The version of your life built to satisfy expectations that were never really yours to begin with. Crisis interrupts the drift, forcibly, sometimes brutally. But in that interruption is an invitation to examine what actually matters to you, Now that the scaffolding of what you thought your life was supposed to look like has been removed, what do you find yourself missing most? That's data about what genuinely matters. What do you find yourself not missing at all, even though you thought you would? That's equally valuable data. What kind of person do you want to be on the other side of this? Not in terms of achievements or acquisitions, in terms of character, relationships, daily experience. These are the questions that crisis makes available. You don't have to answer them all at once, but stay open to them, because the answers are shaping the version of you that emerges from this, whether you engage consciously with them or not. You might as well engage consciously. Chapter 12. True Surrender, the most misunderstood power. The word surrender carries a lot of baggage. It sounds like defeat, like waving a white flag, like admitting that you've lost and there's nothing left to do but accept the loss. That's not the surrender I'm talking about. What I'm describing is something that looks nothing like defeat and produces nothing like passivity. In fact, once you understand it, you'll realize that true surrender might be one of the most powerful moves available to you. Here's the core of it. True surrender is the act of stopping the war with what has already happened, so that you can put all of that energy toward what comes next. Not giving up, not going passive, not deciding that nothing can be done, just ending the exhausting internal battle against reality, laying down the weapons you've been using to fight facts, because facts, it turns out, are remarkably resistant to being fought. The language of resistance versus the language of acceptance. Pay attention to your internal monologue during a hard moment, and you'll hear one of two very different conversations happening. The resistant conversation sounds like, "This shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. I can't believe this is my life. This is a disaster. I don't know how I'm supposed to deal with this." Every sentence in that monologue is at war with reality. Every sentence is spending energy arguing against what is already true. And every second spent in that argument is a second not spent doing anything useful. The surrendered conversation sounds like, "This is what's happening. I didn't want this, and it's real. Given that this is real, what's available to me right now? What can I actually do from here?" Notice what happens in your body when you read the second version. There's often a release, a subtle but real dropping of tension that comes from stopping the fight, not because the situation has improved, nothing external has changed, but you've stopped burning energy in a direction that was producing nothing, and that energy is now available for something else. That release is surrender. And it's not weakness, it's efficiency, it's intelligence, it's refusing to keep paying a price that was never going to buy you anything. Holding goals lightly. One of the most sophisticated forms of surrender involves your relationship with outcomes. You set a goal, you work toward it, you care about it, and then, at some point in some form, you have to acknowledge that you cannot fully control whether and how it materializes. Other factors are involved, other people's choices, timing, circumstances outside your influence. The question is, can you care deeply about the goal and pursue it with full commitment while simultaneously holding the specific outcome lightly? This sounds paradoxical. It's not. It's actually the most effective way to pursue anything, because the alternative, gripping your desired outcome with white-knuckled insistence, making your emotional well-being entirely contingent on a specific result, creates a kind of performance anxiety that typically degrades rather than improves the quality of your efforts. Think of it like holding sand. Grip it tightly, and it escapes through the clenched spaces in your fist. Hold it with an open palm, and it stays. Give your best effort to what matters to you, genuinely, fully, without holding back, and then let the outcome be what it's going to be, knowing that your job was the effort, not the control of what the effort produces. This is not fatalism. This is wisdom, releasing other people. Perhaps the most immediately relieving application of surrender is releasing your grip on how other people respond to your crisis. When you're struggling, you naturally have needs. You want understanding, you want support, you want people to show up in specific ways that feel caring and helpful. And sometimes, often honestly, people disappoint you. They don't know what to say. They offer the wrong thing. They're less available than you hoped. They respond with advice when you needed presence, or presence when you needed practical help. The urge to manage this, to guide people's responses, to feel hurt when they get it wrong, to keep score of who showed up and who didn't, is understandable. But it costs you enormously. You can ask clearly for what you need. You can express honestly what would be most helpful. You can communicate your situation with honesty and trust people to respond from their own capacity and limitations. And then surrender. Let their response be their response. Some people will surprise you with their depth of care. Some people will reveal limitations you didn't previously see. Both are useful information. Neither is worth the energy of trying to control. Your focus belongs on what you can influence, and how other people choose to show up is not in that category. The relief on the other side. Here is what people who practice genuine surrender consistently report. Relief. Not immediately, not without grief for the thing they had to stop fighting for, but underneath the grief, relief. The relief of putting down something very heavy that you've been carrying without quite realizing how heavy it was. The weight of resisting what is, the weight of trying to control what you cannot control, the weight of maintaining a story about how things were supposed to be against the mounting evidence that they are something different. When you put that weight down, your hands are free, free to build something, free to reach for help, free to take the next available step without the drag of everything you've been trying to force. This is not the end of your effort. It's the beginning of your effective effort. The effort that has a chance of actually getting you somewhere, because it's pointed in a real direction, toward what is rather than against it. True surrender is not the white flag of defeat. It's the green light of beginning. Chapter 13. Rebuilding. But better. This time, there comes a moment in every crisis where the acute phase begins to soften. Not dramatically, not all at once. But something shifts, almost imperceptibly at first, from pure survival mode into something that feels tentatively, cautiously like forward motion. This is the rebuilding phase, and it is both the most hopeful and, in some ways, the most treacherous part of the journey. It's hopeful because you can finally begin to imagine a future again. The tunnel that felt endless starts to show something that might be light at the far end. Your energy, which was entirely consumed by getting through each day, starts to have a small surplus, enough to look up, look around, and begin thinking about what comes next. It's treacherous because of one very specific temptation, the urge to rebuild as quickly as possible, to replace what was lost as fast as you can, to get back to normal, to get back to stable, to get the external appearance of your life, looking put together again before you've actually done the internal work that this period is asking of you. Resist that urge, gently, compassionately, but firmly. Because here's the thing about rebuilding quickly without intention. You tend to rebuild the same thing, the same patterns, the same structures, the same arrangements that may have been quietly not working long before the crisis made that obvious. You get your life looking like it did before, and then wonder why it doesn't feel better than it did before. The invitation of rebuilding is not to recreate your old life faster, it's to build your next life better. Starting with the foundation, not the facade. When a building is damaged, skilled engineers don't start with the paint and the windows. They start underground. With the foundation, they assess what's structural and what's cosmetic. They figure out what can be repaired, what needs to be replaced, and what was never properly built in the first place. The same principle applies to rebuilding your life after crisis. The foundation is your values. What actually matters to you at the deepest level when external pressures and other people's expectations are stripped away. Not what you thought should matter, not what looked good, what genuinely, honestly matters. Crisis has spent considerable time stripping away the cosmetic layers of your life. That process, brutal as it's been, has given you something valuable, a clearer view of the foundation. Use it. Ask yourself, with real honesty, the kind that might be uncomfortable, what aspects of your previous life were genuinely fulfilling? Which relationships, which activities, which ways of spending your time and energy left you feeling more like yourself rather than less? And then ask the harder question, what were you maintaining out of habit, out of obligation, out of fear of what would happen if you stopped? What was consuming your energy without giving much back? You get to rebuild with this information now. Most people don't have it because most people never get shaken loose from their routines long enough to examine them. You do. Use it. Strategic patience in the rebuilding process. Rebuilding takes longer than you want it to. This is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. Genuine reconstruction, the kind that creates something more durable and more aligned than what came before, cannot be rushed without compromising the result. This is as true for psychological rebuilding as it is for physical structures. Think about how a broken bone heals. The body does this in stages. First, it creates a soft callus around the break, then gradually mineralizes it into hard bone. This process takes weeks. If you try to use the bone before the callus has hardened, if you rush the timeline because you're impatient to be back to normal, you risk re-breaking it in the same place, often more severely. Psychological healing has similar stages, and they cannot be significantly accelerated without risk. What you can do is support the process. Show up for it consistently. Make the choices day by day that feed the healing rather than interrupt it. Trust that the steadiness of your effort, even when progress is invisible, is doing something real. Strategic patience is not passive waiting. It's active trust in a process whose timeline you don't fully control. Break your rebuilding into the smallest possible meaningful steps. Not get my career back on track. What's one thing you could do this week that moves in that direction? Not rebuild my social life. Who is one person you could reach out to today? Small and consistent beats large and sporadic every time, especially during rebuilding when your energy is still partially allocated to recovery. Rebuilding relationships with wisdom crisis reveals relationships with uncomfortable clarity. Some people who you thought would show up didn't. Some people you wouldn't have expected surprised you with the depth of their care. Some relationships that seemed solid turned out to have been built on convenience or proximity rather than genuine connection. This information is valuable, even when it's painful. The rebuilding phase is a natural time to be intentional about which relationships you invest in going forward. Not with bitterness toward those who disappointed you. People respond to others' crises according to their own capacity, their own fears, their own limitations, none of which are entirely about you, but with clarity about where genuine reciprocity exists and where it doesn't. Forgiveness is useful here, not for the other person's benefit primarily, but for yours. Carrying resentment toward people who didn't show up the way you needed them to is expensive. It costs you energy and attention that you need for rebuilding. Forgiveness is how you stop paying that cost. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning all relationships to their previous status. It means releasing the charge, the active resentment, while making clear-eyed decisions about investment going forward. Some relationships will be rebuilt on new foundations, deeper and more honest than before. Some will be maintained with adjusted expectations. Some may be quietly released to make space for connections that better match who you're becoming. All of these are valid outcomes. What matters is that your choices about relationships are made with intention rather than default. Rebuilding your relationship with yourself, the most important rebuilding project of this entire period, is one that rarely gets named explicitly: rebuilding the relationship you have with yourself. Crisis almost always involves some form of self-doubt. Questions about your judgment, your capability, your worth. A voice, sometimes quiet, sometimes very loud, that uses the difficulty you're experiencing as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. Part of rebuilding is consciously, deliberately dismantling that narrative, not by positive affirmations pasted over the doubt, but by accumulating actual evidence through your actions that contradicts it, by making commitments to yourself and keeping them, by treating yourself with the same patience and encouragement you would offer someone you genuinely care about who is going through the same thing, by deciding, and it is a decision, one you'll have to make repeatedly, that the difficulty of what you've experienced is not evidence of your inadequacy. It's evidence of the difficulty of what you've experienced. Those are different things, and keeping them separate is one of the most important psychological tasks of the rebuilding phase. Chapter 14, Wisdom Forged in Fire. There is a category of knowledge that cannot be taught in classrooms, cannot be conveyed through books alone, cannot be transferred through someone else's careful explanation. It can only be earned. It comes from going through something genuinely hard, not conceptually hard, not vicariously hard through someone else's story, but personally, unavoidably, inescapably hard, and coming out the other side changed by it in ways that are not entirely reversible. This is the wisdom forged in fire, and it is, despite everything it cost you to acquire it, one of the most valuable things a person can possess. What you know now that you didn't know before. You know something about your own resilience that you couldn't have known any other way. Before crisis tests you, your resilience is theoretical. You might think you're strong or worry that you're not, but you don't actually know. The test reveals what the untested self could only speculate about. You've been tested, and here you are, still reading, still thinking, still engaged with the possibility of getting through this and building something worthwhile on the other side. That is data, real, reliable data about what you're made of. The quiet confidence that comes from this knowledge is different from the confidence that comes from never having been seriously challenged. It's not the confidence of someone who believes nothing bad will happen. It's the confidence of someone who knows that if something bad does happen, they have what it takes to meet it. That's unshakable, because it's been tested and held. The recalibration of what matters before significant difficulty, most people operate with a set of priorities that are, if they're honest, heavily influenced by external factors. What looks successful? What earns approval? What fits the expected life trajectory? What keeps up appearances? Crisis burns through that scaffolding and forces contact with something more essential. What actually matters to you in your body, in your gut. When the external validators are removed, many people emerge from serious crisis reporting a version of the same thing. Their definitions of success shifted. Things that seemed enormously important before, status, acquisition, external recognition, lost some of their gravitational pull. Things that seemed secondary, depth of connection, alignment with values, the quality of daily experience, contribution to something beyond themselves, moved to the center. This recalibration is not loss. Even when it feels like loss, even when it requires grieving a previous version of yourself or your life, it is clarification. And clarity about what genuinely matters is among the rarest and most useful things a person can have. You now have more of it than you did before. That's worth something. The empathy that can only come from experience. There is a quality of understanding that comes from having personally navigated difficulty that is qualitatively different from intellectual comprehension. When someone who has never experienced significant loss tries to comfort someone who is grieving, they often reach for the right words. And those words land differently than when they come from someone who has been inside the same territory. Not because the words are different, because the person saying them carries something in their presence, a knowledge, a recognition, an unspoken "I know this place," that the person hearing them can feel. You now carry that. For whatever specific terrain you've been navigating, you carry the authority of direct experience. This makes you genuinely more useful to other people facing similar challenges. Not in a way that requires you to become a professional helper or broadcast your story publicly. Just in the quiet, powerful way that comes from being able to sit with someone in their difficulty and mean it, without flinching, without rushing to fix, without the discomfort of someone who has never been in similar territory. Your experience, as hard as it's been, has expanded your capacity for genuine human connection. That's a gift to you, and through you, to others. The impermanence lesson. You've lived. You now understand impermanence differently than you did before this began. You understood it intellectually. Most reasonably thoughtful people do. But intellectual understanding of impermanence and embodied knowledge of impermanence are completely different things. You've lived the experience of something you thought was solid turning out to be temporary. And while that experience was painful, it also carries a profound and liberating corollary. If the difficult things are temporary, and you now know not just believe, but know that they are. Then so are the good things, which means they deserve more presence and appreciation than they typically get. The people who've been through serious difficulty and integrated what it taught them tend to live differently, not with constant anxiety about losing what they have. That's not what impermanence awareness produces when it's been properly integrated. It produces presence, appreciation, a capacity to be genuinely here for the good moments, rather than moving through them on autopilot, assuming they'll continue indefinitely. Life becomes paradoxically more vivid after you've experienced real loss. The ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary once you know how quickly ordinary can change. Chapter 15, Becoming Unshakable. We've come a long way together in this conversation, from that Tuesday morning when everything cracked open, to understanding the illusion of control, the gift of impermanence, the power of building your inner sanctuary. From radical acceptance and emotional regulation, through the unexpected strength of vulnerability, the practice of creating stability, and the grounding of present moment awareness. Through building lasting resilience, finding meaning in difficulty, the liberation of true surrender, the intentionality of rebuilding, and the hard-won wisdom that can only be forged by fire. Now we arrive at what all of it has been building toward, not a destination, not a permanent state of being, untouched by difficulty, but a quality, a way of moving through life that I can only describe as unshakable. What unshakable actually means? Being unshakable does not mean being unmoved. The unshakable person feels fear. They feel grief. They feel uncertainty, frustration, disappointment, doubt. They are not numb. They are not performing immunity to the full range of human experience. What makes them unshakable is something different. They have developed the capacity to feel all of those things without being fundamentally destabilized by them. They can stand in the storm and feel the wind and remain essentially themselves. Their emotional responses are real and appropriate, but those responses do not define their core state. The fear visits. It doesn't move impermanently. The grief comes in waves. It doesn't become the ocean itself. This is the distinction between being reactive and being responsive, between being driven by your emotional weather and being the person who observes the weather, experiences it fully, and chooses their response from a place that exists beneath it. Where unshakable security comes from, most people locate their sense of security in external things. The job that's stable, the relationship that's solid, the savings account that provides a cushion, the health that's holding, the circumstances arranged just so that allow them to feel okay. And these things matter. They're not trivial. Stability in the external world is genuinely valuable and worth working toward. But when your security is located entirely outside yourself, it is entirely vulnerable to the volatility of external circumstances, which, as you now know from direct experience, can shift without warning and without asking your permission. The unshakable person has done the work, the inner work, the unglamorous, ongoing, often uncomfortable work of locating their security somewhere that external circumstances cannot reach. In their values, which don't change with the stock market or someone else's opinion. In their relationship with themselves, the hard-won, honest, compassionate relationship that has survived being tested. In their knowledge of their own resilience, not theoretical, but documented, proven by everything they've already survived. In their capacity to access stillness, presence, and clarity, even when the world around them is loud and chaotic. This is inner security. It doesn't make you invulnerable to difficulty, but it means that when difficulty comes, and it will come, because you are a living person in a complex world, it does not reach your foundation. The building shakes. The foundation holds. Responsibility, your ultimate freedom. There is a word that gets used so casually that its real meaning is often lost. Responsibility. Break it apart differently. Responsibility, the ability to choose your response. This is, when you think about it clearly, the most fundamental freedom available to a human being. And it is the freedom that no external circumstance can permanently revoke. Your circumstances can be constrained, your options can be limited, your environment can be hostile. But the quality of your response, the attitude you bring, the meaning you make, the next choice you make, remains yours, always. The unshakable person has internalized this so deeply that it becomes automatic. Not because they've stopped caring about outcomes, not because they become indifferent to what happens around them, but because they've discovered through experience that their well-being is not ultimately held hostage by things outside their influence. They can want things to be different. They can work actively and persistently toward making things different, and simultaneously they can be okay right now, in the midst of the effort, without requiring the outcome to arrive before they allow themselves to be okay. This is the freedom on the other side of everything we've discussed in this conversation. You are the lighthouse. We started this conversation with a simple, urgent question. How do you stay calm when life falls apart? And the answer, the real answer, the one that holds up under actual pressure rather than just sounding good in theory, is this. You don't stay calm by avoiding the storm. You stay calm by becoming the lighthouse. The lighthouse doesn't control the weather. It doesn't negotiate with the waves. It doesn't require the ocean to calm down before it begins shining. It shines because that is its nature, because it was built for exactly this, because the storm, for all its fury, cannot extinguish what burns steadily from within. You have spent this entire period, this hard, disorienting, exhausting, clarifying, sometimes devastating period, being built, slowly, imperfectly, in ways that haven't always felt like construction, but built nonetheless, into someone who knows what they're made of, into someone whose security comes from within, into someone who has felt the full weight of genuine difficulty and discovered that they can carry it, not without struggle, not without cost, but carry it, into someone who can now sit with another person in the middle of their worst Tuesday morning and mean it genuinely when they say, I know this territory, I've been here, and there is a way through. The storm did not win. You are still here. And being still here, after everything, is not the consolation prize. It is the whole victory.